So basically, the abolitionist movement was a big group, a social group that actually consisted of the whites and the blacks. It was the first group of its kind, and its main objective was to abolish slavery. The main goal of the abolitionist movement was two things, very, very simple. They were a little bit different than the anti-slavery movement in that they didn't want it to take a gradual period of time or a long period of time for slavery to end. They wanted the emancipation of slaves and they wanted the abolition of slavery. However, like I said before, unlike the anti-slavery movement, they didn't want it to happen over time. They wanted it to happen. Who actually participated in the abolitionist movement? There was actually a large variety of people that participated in the movement because it was, like I said before, the first movement that included whites and blacks. Among the white abolitionists, I have a picture, among the white abolitionists were Protestants, Quakers, and women and men of ideas. These women and men of ideas were generally educators, clergymen, or journalists. To be of ideas generally meant that they were educated themselves and they thought about things more critically than what was on the surface that the rest of the world was thinking. Among the other abolitionists were black abolitionists who were very, very religious. They were often Protestants themselves and part of the middle class. Many of them, like the white abolitionists, were also educators, clergymen, and journalists. Who was William Lloyd Garrison? William Lloyd Garrison was the founder of the abolitionist movement. He was a very, very religious man, and he was also the founder and publisher of the first abolitionist movement newspaper entitled The Liberator. This is William Lloyd Garrison. He was also the founder of the American Anti-Slavery Society. Here are a few examples of the black abolitionists some of the other abolitionists that were involved in the movement, besides William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and David Walker, I have a list here where Harriet Beecher Stowe, Sojourner Truth, and Susan B. Anthony. What tactics did William Garrison and the abolitionists use in the abolitionist movement? Now, Garrison, who was a very religious man, was against the use of violence and voting. Therefore, some of the various movements that they used to be a productive movement included protesting groups focusing on slavery and removing slavery and protesting against slavery, as well as anti-slavery propaganda, which, if we go back to my original pictures, they were the ones who were like making these and posting them up around the towns, as well as literary works, which we'll talk about later on, that were being published in newspapers, different articles, and in novels themselves. Some examples of these famous literary works were the best-known abolitionist newspaper by William Lloyd Garrison, which I had talked about earlier, who was the leader of the movement. His newspaper was entitled The Liberator. Another famous and very influential literary work was the newspaper entitled The North Star, written and published by Frederick Douglass. Lastly, and as I'm sure many of you have heard of, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin was another very, very influential work in its time, and it was actually a work that created a great deal of ruckus in the South. So when did the actual abolitionist movement begin? So the abolitionist movement was established in 1830. Established is a little bit different than begin, because there was many different starts to different things that were involved in the abolitionist movement, as it wasn't just like one set thing that started it off. It went through up until the passing of the 13th Amendment. Blacks were only able to become free in one of two ways. They could either have used the Underground Railroad, which was governed by Harriet Tubman, or they could have worked extremely hard to pay off and buy their freedom from slavery. This is the example here of the Liberator and the North Star. Up top is the Liberator and down low is the North Star. On the back we have pictures of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And then here I just have a very effective picture of like the end of the abolitionist movement. You know, of course there was glory, there was celebrations, and there was happiness and praise because it was a very, very happy time.